The sky above the Himalayas was a storm's battlefield. Dark, rolling clouds collided with jagged peaks, while lightning cut across the horizon like the flash of a celestial blade. Below, a passenger aircraft carrying over 100 souls fought against the turbulence that threatened to crush its delicate frame. Inside the cabin, most passengers were unaware of the peril outside. Some slept, lulled by the hum of engines. Others glanced at the seatback screens, noting altitude and speed. None of them could see the jagged cliffs looming like silent predators beneath the storm. The young pilot, barely in his 20s, had flown over the mountains before, but never under conditions like this. He gripped the controls with white-knuckled determination, aware that any miscalculation could cost hundreds of lives. A sudden gust slammed the plane sideways, shaking it violently. The engines roared in defiance, struggling to maintain lift. Then came the unthinkable. A warning light blinked red on the dashboard. The right engine was failing. Smoke curled faintly from its housing, a subtle but terrifying sign that the aircraft was losing its heart. The storm had already pushed the plane dangerously close to cliffs and peaks. Turning back wasn't an option. Descending blindly could mean certain death. The pilot's mind became a whirlwind of calculations. He had to find a landing site, a narrow clearing on a mountain, flat enough to hold the massive plane. But the Himalayas offered no forgiving spaces. Every ridge was jagged, every valley steep. Snow-laden trees clung to slopes like desperate hands. Streams of icy water cut through the terrain below, glinting briefly as lightning illuminated the mountains. Time was slipping away. Every second spent searching increased the risk. The aircraft's instruments flashed urgent warnings. Altitude, stall speed, vertical speed, every light screaming danger. The pilot scanned for the impossible, a plateau that might save them. And then he saw it, a narrow, snow-dusted clearing perched between two jagged cliffs. It was barely wide enough for the wingspan of the aircraft, but it was the only option. Descending toward the plateau required finesse and precision. The pilot throttled back carefully, tilting the nose to slow the descent while compensating for the wind's fury. The plane pitched violently with every gust. Snow whipped across the windshield, obscuring the view. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the narrow landing site in blinding flashes. The engine failure intensified. The plane rocked dangerously. One wrong move would send it tumbling down the mountain. The pilot adjusted the rudder and ailerons continuously, balancing the aircraft between gravity and catastrophe. Every muscle in his body tensed. Every thought focused on one goal: keep the plane alive and the passengers safe. Inside the cabin, fear gripped the passengers. A mother clutched her child, nails digging into the seat in silent terror. A businessman closed his eyes, praying. Others stared in frozen disbelief. They had no idea that the young pilot's quick calculations and unflinching courage were the only things standing between them and the sheer cliffs below. The plane finally reached the plateau. The landing gear made contact, bouncing against the uneven snow and rock. Sparks flew from the skids as stones scraped the fuselage. The aircraft slid slightly, but the pilot's skill kept it balanced, inches away from disaster. For a tense moment, it seemed as though the plane might tip over. Then slowly, it came to a complete stop. The storm continued to rage, snow and ice whipping across the mountain. The aircraft, battered and scarred, stood like a small fortress against the forces of nature. Passengers stared out at the perilous peaks, realizing only now the scale of what had just happened. The pilot exhaled, muscles aching, mind exhausted, yet alive with the awareness that he had performed an impossible feat. Landing the plane was only the first challenge. The plateau was isolated, surrounded by cliffs and icy slopes. Rescue would take hours, possibly days. Supplies were limited, and the storm showed no signs of relenting. The pilot moved through the cabin, instructing passengers to remain calm, distributing blankets and rationing food. The night crept in, shadows stretching across the plateau. As the storm continued its relentless assault, lightning illuminated the peaks, revealing the precariousness of their position. The aircraft, a marvel of engineering, had survived the impossible landing, but the human element, courage, quick thinking, and composure had made the true difference. Outside, the wind howled like a predator circling its prey. Snow began to fall, coating the plateau in a thin, icy layer. The pilot knew that every decision from this point forward would be critical. Each hour, each movement had to be calculated. Survival now depended not only on luck, but on endurance, teamwork, and unyielding courage. The passengers began to understand the enormity of their situation. They were safe for the moment, alive against overwhelming odds, perched on a remote mountain plateau with nature itself conspiring against them. The young pilot, however, knew this was far from over. He walked to the cockpit once more, checking instruments, evaluating the weather, and planning the next steps. Supplies would need to be managed carefully. Communication with the outside world was limited, disrupted by the storm in the mountains. Every decision could mean life or death. In that quiet, tense moment, the pilot understood the full weight of his responsibility. He had not just landed a plane. He had preserved hope, maintained calm, and protected over 100 lives in circumstances that could have broken even the most seasoned aviators. The storm continued, relentless and unforgiving. The aircraft rested on the mountain, a symbol of human skill, courage, and resilience. And the pilot, a young man who had been tested beyond his training and imagination, prepared for the long hours ahead, knowing that the next challenge, surviving the night, preserving the passengers, and signaling for rescue, had just begun. The storm had not relented. Snow whipped across the plateau in endless sheets, driven by winds that seemed determined to strip the very air from their lungs. The Boeing passenger plane, battered from its impossible landing, rested precariously atop the icy cliff. Every step outside was a battle with gravity, frost, and uncertainty. Inside, the passengers were frozen between fear and awe. The young pilot had delivered them from the immediate danger. But survival required more than skillful control. It demanded resilience, improvisation, and courage in the face of the unknown. The cabin became a sanctuary against the elements, though thin metal walls offered only a fragile shield. Outside, visibility was almost non-existent. The peaks disappeared into the white chaos, jagged rocks and cliffs hidden beneath layers of snow. A misstep could be fatal. Every shadow seemed alive with potential danger. The pilot moved calmly through the cabin, organizing passengers. Blankets were distributed, supplies inventoried. Rations were measured carefully. Though his body ached and his mind spun from exhaustion, he knew the importance of structure. Panic was the enemy. Calm was their weapon. He monitored the instruments even now, though the plane was stationary. The storm had disrupted communication channels, leaving them isolated from the world. Satellite phones were frozen, emergency radios crackled with static, and signals bounced off the mountains only to disappear into the storm. The pilot realized the gravity of their isolation. They were alone, perched on a plateau that might as well have been at the edge of the world. Outside, the wind tore at the wings and fuselage of the Boeing. The metal groaned under the pressure, ice forming sharp spikes on the edges. The young pilot's eyes traced every shift, every movement, aware that structural failure was a possibility. A plane in the air had one set of dangers. A grounded plane on a narrow plateau had another. The difference was subtle but deadly. As night fell, temperatures plummeted. The passengers huddled together, breath visible in the cabin's dim glow. The pilot checked the emergency systems repeatedly, ensuring heaters and life support equipment were functioning. The engines could no longer provide warmth, only power, and he had to ration fuel carefully. He turned his attention to the external environment. The snowstorm slowed only slightly, and visibility remained near zero. The plateau, already perilously small, was becoming more treacherous with each inch of accumulating snow. Ice covered the plane's tires and the plateau's edges, turning every step outside into a potential disaster. In the dark, the pilot thought ahead. Rescue might take hours, possibly days. The passengers had no experience with survival in such conditions, and even a small misstep could cascade into tragedy. He decided to plan for contingencies, group assignments, ration schedules, and lookout rotations. Every minute stretched into an eternity. The storm seemed to mock their existence, hurling snow and ice against the fuselage, shaking it as if testing their resolve. The pilot stood on the wing briefly, bracing himself against the wind, scanning the plateau for any sign of stable ground. He measured distances, potential hazards, and escape routes in case the plane shifted. Inside, passengers began to absorb the severity of their situation. Some whispered prayers, others simply stared at the storm, their minds racing with memories of ordinary lives now suspended above death. The young pilot's calm presence became an anchor. Every decision he made was observed and silently trusted, even without words. Hours passed. The storm remained relentless, but the pilot found patterns in the chaos, slight decreases in wind gusts, moments when visibility improved, tiny opportunities to act. He used these brief lulls to inspect the exterior. The plane had minor scratches and dents, but the landing had not compromised its structural integrity. The wings remained solid. The fuselage remained intact. The Boeing, battered though it was, had survived the impossible landing. As dawn approached, the storm began to thin slightly. The soft light revealed the full magnitude of the plateau. Snowdrifts clung to the edges, jagged rocks jutted through, and sheer drops fell hundreds of meters into valleys below. It was a breathtaking, terrifying sight. Survival depended entirely on maintaining calm, conserving resources, and waiting for the storm to ease. The pilot scanned the horizon. Far below, movement could be discerned. Tiny specks that might be animals or distant rescue teams. He knew they would have to signal for help when conditions permitted. He prepared for the challenge, creating visible markers on the plateau, signaling with flares if necessary, and maintaining the passengers' morale. The first night had been survived. Every passenger was alive. The pilot had demonstrated extraordinary courage and presence of mind, but the journey was far from over. Survival was no longer just about landing the plane. It was about enduring the elements, managing fear, and keeping hope alive in a place where hope seemed fragile. As the sun rose behind storm clouds, casting faint light on the plateau, the pilot checked each passenger. Blankets were in place, rations accounted for, and spirits were cautiously stabilized. The storm, though less violent, still raged in gusts across the peaks. They were alive, perched atop a mountain with little more than determination and will to sustain them. In that quiet moment, the pilot realized the true test had only begun. Nature was unforgiving, isolation was real, and every decision would determine their fate. He knew that they had survived the impossible landing, but surviving the plateau, the storm, and potential rescue delays required an entirely different set of skills, strategic thinking, patience, and relentless vigilance. The plateau stretched endlessly under the early morning sky, a fragile island of survival in a sea of snow, ice, and rock. The young pilot, weary yet resolute, prepared for the day ahead. Every breath, every motion, every decision mattered. The passengers, though shaken, followed his lead, understanding without words that their lives now depended on a combination of courage, skill, and the strength to endure. Dawn had broken, but the mountains offered no mercy. The soft glow of early sunlight revealed the true scale of the plateau, a fragile, snow-covered shelf perched between sheer cliffs. Every movement outside was a negotiation with gravity, ice, and wind. The Boeing passenger plane, still perched atop this precarious outcrop, seemed simultaneously small and monumental, a testament to human skill against nature's vast, indifferent power. The young pilot had spent the night monitoring passengers, ensuring they stayed calm and warm, and rationing what little food and blankets were available. Now, as the storm abated slightly, he turned his attention to the next critical challenge: rescue. Communication channels remained largely dead. Satellite phones crackled weakly. Emergency radios, their signals bouncing off peaks, failed to reach any nearby stations. The pilot knew they could not remain passive. Each hour they stayed stranded increased the risk. Hypothermia, frostbite, or structural hazards could claim lives before help even arrived. He began formulating a plan to maximize visibility, to create signals that rescuers could detect from miles away. Outside, snow and ice had turned the plateau into a slippery, treacherous landscape. The pilot inspected the plane's exterior, measuring distances and calculating where flares, mirrors, and reflective panels could be positioned. Every choice had to account for the possibility of shifting winds and falling snow. The plateau might not remain safe if a sudden storm rolled back in. Inside the cabin, passengers watched with wide, anxious eyes as he worked. The pilot had become their anchor, their silent leader. Even in the absence of words, they followed his motions, understanding his strategies instinctively. Blankets were adjusted, rationed food prepared, and simple survival tasks delegated. The sense of calm he projected was fragile yet vital. Meanwhile, the mountains remained indifferent. Jagged peaks, hidden crevasses, and sheer drops surrounded them on every side. The plateau was narrow, just wide enough for the Boeing, but it offered no margin for error. A shift in snow or ice could send the plane sliding, or a passenger tumbling down the cliffs. Every calculation mattered. Every motion carried weight. The pilot began setting up visual markers. He used reflective panels from emergency kits, strategically positioning them across the plateau to catch sunlight. Flares were stored for the precise moment they could be fired safely, illuminating their location for distant rescuers. He adjusted these repeatedly, measuring angles, anticipating where the first search teams might look. By mid-morning, the first signs of approaching teams became visible. Tiny silhouettes appeared far down the slopes, moving cautiously toward the plateau. The pilot's plan was working. His reflective markers had guided searchers to their location. Yet there was no room for celebration. The descent and extraction were perilous. Rescuers would need to navigate the same narrow, icy paths, and the plane's location left no easy landing for helicopters. Every step required meticulous coordination. The pilot began organizing passengers for potential extraction. Those capable of walking were grouped and instructed on the safest routes. Others remained near the plane, under blankets, protected from wind gusts and icy patches. Every movement was calculated. The margin for error was razor-thin. As rescue teams approached, the storm offered one final test. Winds picked up suddenly, flurries of snow obscuring visibility. The plateau, already slippery, became treacherous. The pilot moved quickly, adjusting positions of passengers and markers, signaling the rescuers with flares and reflective surfaces. The Boeing, a monument of both human engineering and daring, seemed to shiver in the wind, as though sensing the tension of the moment. One by one, the passengers began to traverse the plateau under careful guidance, their steps deliberate, aided by the pilot's instructions and the rescuers' ropes and support. Each movement carried anxiety and hope intertwined. The young pilot's eyes scanned constantly for hazards, shifting ice, hidden crevasses, or loose snow that could trigger a fall. His mind calculated risks at a pace unmatched. Balancing human instinct and learned precision, minutes felt like hours as the last. Passengers reached relative safety, near the rescue teams. Every hand extended, every step guided, was a small victory against the indifferent mountains. The pilot ensured that the final passengers, those most vulnerable, were secured and prepared for transport, moving only when conditions allowed safe passage. Finally, the last group stood at a point where rescuers could safely operate. Relief washed over the pilot, though tempered by the knowledge that danger was never fully gone until every person was off the plateau. The plane itself remained behind, a testament to the ordeal they had endured, but no longer a threat to lives as long as no one attempted to move around it recklessly. The storm began to recede, light breaking through clouds and casting warm hues across the jagged peaks. The passengers, though exhausted, were alive, their lives preserved by the courage, skill, and unwavering presence of the young pilot. Every survival strategy, every calculated risk had paid off. In the quiet aftermath, the magnitude of their ordeal began to sink in. The plateau, the storm, and the narrow escape from the mountains had tested not only physical limits but human endurance, patience, and resolve. The pilot, standing among the passengers, could finally allow himself a brief moment of reflection. The young man had navigated impossible conditions, a raging storm, a perilous landing, isolation on a mountain plateau, and now the delicate coordination of rescue operations. Every action, every decision had mattered. Lives had been preserved because of focus, courage, and the ability to remain calm when chaos reigned. As helicopters hovered in the distance, ready to extract the stranded passengers, the pilot knew that the story would be remembered, not for the storm, the mountains, or even the landing itself, but for the endurance, skill, and bravery that had kept over 100 lives intact. The journey to safety was underway. The passengers, guided by the young pilot, were moving toward rescue, each step a testament to human resilience. And though the mountains remained indifferent, silent, and imposing, they had witnessed an extraordinary display of courage, intelligence, and leadership. The sun climbed higher over the Himalayan peaks, cutting through the last remnants of the storm. Snow glistened under the pale morning light, reflecting the harsh beauty of the mountains. The plateau, once a place of peril and tension, had become a temporary haven, a fragile island of survival amidst jagged cliffs and swirling winds. The young pilot surveyed the scene. The passengers were alive, their faces pale but filled with a cautious relief. They had endured the night, the storm, and the isolation together. But the next challenge awaited, returning safely from the plateau to civilization. The extraction would require precise timing, careful coordination, and unwavering courage. Helicopters hovered above the plateau, rotors cutting through icy gusts, sending plumes of snow swirling around the landing area. The pilot coordinated with the rescue teams, signaling which passengers could move first, prioritizing those most vulnerable. The operations required calm precision. One misstep could send someone sliding down the cliffside or destabilize the small landing area. Passengers moved cautiously, guided by ropes and the pilot's instructions. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated. The mountains tested them one last time, as loose snow and ice threatened to make the journey perilous. But the pilot's steady presence instilled confidence. He moved among them, ensuring that no one panicked, that no one rushed. Survival depended on discipline as much as courage. Once the passengers were safely harnessed, the rescue teams began the extraction. Helicopters hovered steadily, their pilots battling strong winds, shifting air currents, and snow gusts. The young pilot coordinated signals, using reflective panels and hand gestures to guide the operation. It was a delicate dance between human skill and mechanical precision. Inside the helicopters, the passengers felt a mix of relief and awe. They had survived what many would consider impossible: a storm, a narrow mountain plateau, and the constant threat of nature's fury. Each person silently acknowledged the young pilot's role, recognizing that their lives had depended not just on chance, but on his courage, skill, and calm leadership. As the last passengers were lifted from the plateau, the pilot remained for a brief moment, ensuring that the operation went smoothly. The Boeing plane, now abandoned on the snow-covered ledge, bore witness to the extraordinary sequence of events. Its engines were silent, its fuselage battered, but it had fulfilled its final role, preserving life. The extraction was complete. Helicopters carried the passengers to a safe landing zone below, where medical teams and support crews waited. Warm blankets, food, and medical attention awaited them, a stark contrast to the harsh environment they had endured just moments ago. The mountains, once threatening and indifferent, now seemed to fade into the background, their danger replaced by awe and gratitude. The passengers disembarked, shaking, exhausted, and emotional. Some wept silently. Others embraced one another, overwhelmed by the relief of surviving the ordeal. And all of them looked at the young pilot with admiration and respect. He had faced the storm, the mountains, and the near-impossible landing, and emerged victorious, not for glory, but to preserve lives. Rescue teams praised his actions. Authorities noted that the operation had been a perfect combination of skill, courage, and coordination. The pilot's quick thinking had transformed a potential tragedy into a story of survival against extraordinary odds. News would later report on the event, highlighting the pilot's heroism and the passengers' resilience, inspiring millions around the world. Yet for the pilot, the experience was more personal. He knew that courage wasn't about recognition. It was about action in moments when fear and uncertainty could paralyze others. Every calculation, every decision, every moment of composure had made a difference. Lives had been saved because someone refused to give in to panic. The passengers were now safe, and the pilot prepared to leave the plateau. Helicopters lifted him alongside the last support crew, rising above the jagged cliffs. The plateau, with its snow, ice, and scars from the landing, slowly receded below. It had been a place of terror, resilience, and human courage, a location where ordinary people became extraordinary. As the helicopters carried them toward civilization, the passengers reflected on the ordeal. The fear had been immense, the isolation overwhelming. But through it all, they had witnessed courage, precision, and human spirit at its finest. The pilot had not just flown a plane. He had navigated life, death, and nature's relentless challenges with calm and determination. By the time they reached safety, The story of the landing, the survival on the mountain, and the heroism displayed had already begun to circulate. Reporters, officials, and witnesses would retell the sequence of events with astonishment. The young pilot, once an ordinary figure among the crew, was now a symbol of bravery, composure, and the extraordinary capabilities of human skill. Even after the adrenaline faded, the memories of the plateau, the storm, and the tense landing remained vivid. The passengers would never forget the fear, the uncertainty, and the relief of survival, and they would remember the pilot who, in a moment of extreme pressure, demonstrated what true courage looked like. Not in grand gestures, but in calculated, selfless, and determined action. As night fell over the mountains, the pilot reflected quietly. The Boeing plane had endured, the passengers had survived, and the mountains remained unchanged, silent, majestic, and indifferent. But within that silence, a story had been written. A story of survival, courage, and human resilience, one that would be told for generations.